right, this is Ruthie here with Thomas and Kiara, and we have some exciting topics today, because who doesn't like to talk about porn? So we're going to be talking about porn and porn addiction, and this topic came as a request to us, so we're excited to discuss it a little bit here. But let's introduce ourselves first. Kiara, you want to start?
Hi, I'm Kiara. I'm a third-year adult development student here at the University of Guelph. I'm currently doing my practicum at the Wellness Center, and yeah.
Awesome. And what made you want to be on the show?
Well, I thought it was a really cool opportunity to kind of explore different topics, and it's also something that I'm interested in later on in my life.
Yeah?
So, yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I was thinking about being a couples and family therapist.
You are in the right building right now. Yep.
As well as a sex therapist. So I definitely feel like this falls into the categories, and it would be really, helpful and, resourceful for later on and whatnot. So,
Kiara, what made you think that you might want to do sex therapy with couples and other groups?
Well, I thought that I was very, comfortable talking about things like this and, with my friends or whatnot, and I just, I have a very, open mind, and I'm very, accepting, and I have a lot of, will for, human rights and, equality and whatnot. I don't know if it's because, my background and stuff like that, and I've just been very, comfortable talking about stuff like that. So I think that it's just a good opportunity. I feel like there's a lot of communication issues between people, if it's my own family or if it's other people I know, or relationships that are my friends' relationships. I'm able to kind of have a good opinion and a well-rounded opinion and view and perspective. So
important stuff. Good. Well, I am so glad that you're here, and I will look forward to your conversation both as an aspiring professional in the field, but also as a student and just a regular person as well, or irregular, as you like. Hey, Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Sure. I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Guelph. I study workplace psychology, which doesn't sound like it's very sexual in nature, but I always add a little bit of kink to my life. And yeah, I like to get a bit of a laugh. And so I study sexualities and gender in the workplace and how we can be inclusive towards all people as they work. And for fun, I love to do these kinds of radio shows and talk about sex, sexuality, relationships and gender and social norms and porn.
And porn. And prepping for this episode, you read a bunch of journal articles and things about porn addiction, sex addiction.
I mean, it was a sacrifice I was willing to make. So.
I saw your social media posts and people saying, I can definitely inform you about porn addiction, which I thought was an interesting kind of a bragging response about it, right? Different ways that we view this socially.
And I think, there's a lot in terms of the social networks we create, right? There's people that we associate with typically have similar values to us. And so when I say I'm reading about porn, the people I know typically respond very positively about that.
Mm-hmm. Me too. So
what about you, Ruthie? Is there an introduction that you want to give?
Yeah, so I teach here at the University of Guelph at the Couple and Family Therapy Center. So I mostly teach master's students, but right now I have one of those big 500 undergrad student classes on couples and relationships. So my areas of specialization include sexual well-being across diverse populations from a sex-positive, strengths-based perspective, and also the resilience of trauma survivors. So when I can, I like to study the sex lives of trauma survivors, especially folks who feel like they're doing pretty well overall. So I'm also the co-chair for the Guelph Sexuality Conference and a bunch of other projects and things like that. So and it's fun to be doing the radio show. I'm excited to be able to talk about this with both of you, and I get some different perspectives. So maybe a good place to start is, do you think that there's such a thing as porn addiction? Do you think it's real?
I feel that you could honestly be addicted to anything. So technically, is it really porn addiction, or are you just addicted to something? Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a lot more to just porn addiction. I feel like it really has to be causing issues in your life, in your day-to-day life, for it to be categorized as an addiction. So if you just watch porn here and there, or you watch it every night, is that really an addiction? You just do it on your free time, as opposed to, do you watch it in class? Do you need to watch it all the time? Mm-hmm. Is it something that you can't go through a day without watching pornography?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell me what the word addiction means to you in the sort of context that anything could be addictive.
Well, you have addictions, you have biological addictions, or addictions to drugs and stuff like that, or alcohol. But you also have just addictions to, you have OCD, you have addictions to not like anything. I don't even know if it's possible to be addicted to reading or something like that, but you just kind of get obsessed with something, and you might be able to get obsessed with pornography or with anything if there's too much, if it really touches you on a certain basis. And it could also be a type of comfort, so people who aren't necessarily okay with their sexuality, or they are not able to kind of be open and social about it, that like pornography just might be kind of a safe haven or a comfortable area. So
So lots of different uses for it, and lots of different reasons why people might be utilizing porn, enjoying porn, or not enjoying their watching of porn, but doing it anyway. And I think that your definition brings up an interesting conversation within this, which is kind of the popular use of the word addiction versus the clinical or research use of the word addiction. And I think oftentimes this conversation about whether there's porn addiction or sex addiction ends up getting hooked on those definitions of terms in such a way that it becomes a really not such a useful conversation for the public anymore. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely nail on the head, like hit the nail on the head. Idioms are hard sometimes. That, we use the term addiction so broadly nowadays. I think last night said I'm addicted to Netflix, and maybe I am, but I think that colloquial use of the phrase addiction could sometimes make us forget what addictions can be. And addictions require the subjective sense of harm or discomfort in your life. They have to be perceived to be invasive within your life, so affecting your relationships, affecting your work, affecting some other domain of your life. And they need to violate cultural norms. How we define all of those categories, I think that'll be much of our conversation today. But that clinical or medical use of addiction is established in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual.
There's a biochemical element and things like that. And so we come into words like addiction versus compulsion versus a bad habit versus a taboo, or things we're ashamed about. And I think a lot of things that Kiara was saying really show the overlap between social perceptions of a thing, whatever it may be, versus that. So for instance, if I, as a fat person, start going to the gym 2 hours a day, I'll get congratulated on that. Generally speaking, if I start watching porn for 2 hours a day, the response will be very different. But both of those things will, in a non-sexual way as well, arouse physical excitation. Your heartbeat goes up, stuff like that. So there's a lot of similarities between those two things. So maybe I should stop going to the gym and watch porn. But and maybe I already have. But at the same time, the social taboo of that is very different. Or, Thomas, if you were to start reading 2 hours of journal articles every night, probably people would say you're not doing enough homework. So it really does differ between the different things that we're talking about. But I think it's also important in these conversations to be thinking about the extent. So for a small number of people, a small percentage of people, the repercussions will be extreme, right? And then there's a whole lot of people for whom it's less extreme, maybe a little troubling, maybe not troubling at all, except from a social taboo standpoint. Or there's also issues around whether people feel okay about the type of porn they're watching. And that gets lumped in with this too. Okay, I've talked a lot. What are you thinking as you listen to all this, Kiara?
Sorry, what was that?
What are you thinking as you're listening to all this? What comes to mind?
Well, I feel like there's a lot of different people, and I feel like people tend to categorize or refer to pornography as like something that's bad and something that shouldn't be done, but then, and like it's something that goes against social norms. However, like a lot of people who, or not a lot of people, but people who watch pornography, or they watch like different categories of it, might just be expressing their own sexual fantasies, their own desires that aren't technically either a part of social norms. So how do you expect them to do so? So it's also hard to talk about it with your partner. So they kind of get erotic, what's the word?
Shame?
Yeah, they just get like pleasure, I guess, from it.
Oh, okay.
So
other direction.
Yeah, so it really depends on the person, and it depends on like how it actually is affecting their lives. I feel like if it's not affecting their life and you're just watching on your own time and like it's whatever, but if it's really having like a effect on you or your sexual life, or anything like that, then it's something to consider that like it might be problematic. But other than that, I feel like people just kind of associate pornography, or if you're a regular porn viewer, that you're addicted to it, but you're not necessarily addicted to it. I'm not addicted to TV show because I like it all the time. I enjoy it. I like watching it. It does the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So give me a student perspective, or give all of us a bit of a student perspective on how you think watching porn, at least sometimes, is perceived now, because I feel like it's changing over time. People's okayness and access to it, though both of those things are changing at the same time.
It's changing really quickly. I know that in a gender perspective, it's very normal for like a male to watch pornography. I know it's very normal for like someone who gender identifies as a male will watch pornography. It's super normal, like whether it's like lesbian porn or just like regular porn, like it's super, super normal. But then as soon as like a female watches it, it's like, oh wow, like she's weird, or
those
like
cultural standards are different. Yeah.
Or like term like freak or whatnot, like she's crazy or nymphomaniac or something like that. But I think that that's changing. I feel like a lot of women do watch it nowadays, and I know like some people are like will kind of like watch it as like an educational type of thing too. So I feel like that's good, and like people they're not so scared to look at it. It's very easily accessible with like
it's hard not to access it. Maybe that's just me and my search terms and what pops up, but
it's there. You watch anything and there's always like pornography references, or there's like TV shows, like little kid shows. I swear they have stuff that kind of like implement sexuality. So I feel like the growth of like being able to talk about sex and being able to have like open conversations with people has also kind of like opened the door to like discussing about pornography. I feel like it's a lot less of a taboo subject than it was maybe 50 years ago, because people weren't exploring sexuality. You didn't have the internet, exactly. So
well, and just to build off of that, so there's some statistics that were provided in an article entitled Internet Sex Addiction, Risk Factors, Stages of Development and Treatment by Kimberly S. Young for the Center for Internet Addiction Recovery.
So there might be a little bias there because they're from the Center for Internet Addiction Recovery.
Yes. And they cite these numbers from the Economic Times around pornography, that pornography is the most profitable or profit generator on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
That the size of the industry is $57 billion worldwide, with $12 billion in the United States. And this was back in 2006.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how influential porn, sex toys, and other elements of the adult industry has been in driving all industry internationally, but especially in this region of the world. I mean, that's why we have moving pictures. Like, it propelled all of this. The internet is big as it is now because of porn.
Yeah, it says here from the Internet Porn Statistics that at the time, so 2006, 2008, there were about 4.2 million pornographic websites that constituted 12% of the entire internet site list. The pages constituted 372 million hits, and daily pornographic search engine requests ranged 68 million, or 25% of total search engine requests.
I think a lot of listeners and perhaps some people at this table are thinking, yeah, I definitely contributed a substantial amount to that.
I was half of that, I think.
Well, I'm the other half. Oh, no, it's just us, Thomas. Oh. Kiara, can you imagine a time without readily accessible porn? Can you even imagine that?
No. I feel like it's in everything. Like, sex is just everywhere. And, like, is that pornography? Like, how do you put a standard on what is and what isn't pornography? Like, we have... I think it was 2 years ago, The Blue is the Warmest Color, that movie. And it involved, like a pretty long, very, like, explicit sex scene. However, like, you have any American movie who has, like, a heterosexual sex scene or whatnot, and it's totally normal. But, like, in New York, they wanted to fight it completely, and they didn't want it to be available for viewers. So how do you even define pornography?
Right. So is 50 Shades of Grey the book porn? Is 50 Shades of Grey the movie porn? Are animated GIFs that have explicit content porn? Is the sexting you send to other people porn? Are the pictures that you're putting up with your profiles or whatever porn? Like, where does this, things on cable TV that clearly are depicting sexual content, but maybe focusing more on the face, or there's a bed sheet or something like that. Where does it cross into the line? And at some point we have a moralistic judgment about where it counts, and then it gets porn, it gets the word porn, but everything else is maybe erotica or maybe just normal.
Definitely.
Thomas, do you remember a time before porn was readily available online? You're my oldest one here, so my answer will be yes, but go ahead.
I was trying to think about that, and honestly, I grew up right at the cusp, the changing when the internet started to become readily available, and we were a technological household growing up, sort of ahead of the times in some ways. So for me, it always was readily available. There weren't parental controls back then, or at least they weren't used. And so there was sort of an access to it at that level. Outside of the internet, though, in terms of stores or even among friends, there wasn't sort of a sharing of it or a readily accessible nature to it in a material sense. It was really just the internet that was the mechanism for it becoming readily available in my life.
Yeah, I think for me it occurred in a changeover. So in my teens and early 20s, so we got our first home computer when I was 16, and it wasn't that far into home computers happening. It was a Commodore 64 for anyone who wants to Google that.
Commodore
right?
64.
Yeah, and I can still impersonate a modem noise if I want to, and things like that. So ours was located in the kitchen, and that was parental control in my household. But you know what? Like, a lot of people didn't really hang out in the kitchen, so yeah. So if you wanted explicit materials then, or at least 16-year-old me, if I wanted explicit materials then, it meant logging into Prodigy or AOL, whichever one you happen to have, which mostly was chat rooms, and a really crummy browser, and having people basically send you individual picture files. And the internet was too crappy to have streaming video or to have people sending videos or sharing them back and forth. Those things just didn't exist at that point in time. And so it was still really inconvenient to get your porn online at that point in time. And so a lot of places were still selling, magazines, or you buy your VHS and then eventually DVD and things like that. So there's still a lot of that available in bookstores and things like that, smoke shops and stuff. So kind of watching that whole thing turn over. And then, just last year I was on the judging committee for the Feminist Porn Awards, and just thinking about how different that was. There's suddenly a Dropbox folder, and all these people had submitted their submissions, and we're watching 40 hours of porn in a month, which can get really boring. And it's fun in the beginning. You're like, haha, I'm a porn judge, and then later you're like, oh my goodness, I have seen this sex act portrayed now 50 million different ways, and I'm no longer interested in it. So there's been a lot of changeover. So in a society or culture where porn is consistently prevalent, and where we can engage with it as often as we like, but also perhaps are learning to walk away from it as often as we like, or maybe a little less often, but the rules and the criteria are still being made by people my age or older, who are from a time where you had to go to a store, walk into the back section where people kind of eye you funny and there's like a camera or something, and go and purchase it, with cash, so there's not a record of it on your credit card or something. Those are still the people who are making the criteria for what a problem is. And so I also wonder, and of course, for some folks, there's an extreme issue here, and I don't want to ignore them, but they are the minority of what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I think about those differences in standards of things,
Yeah, I really want to pull up on that, sort of the self-diagnosis of porn addiction versus the other diagnosis about a porn addiction. And we'll get into that when we come back from our quick break at CFRU 93.3 FM.
Yeah, and you can stream us online at cfru.ca. You're listening to Sexually Charged Radio at the University of Guelph on CFRU 93.3 FM and online at cfru.ca. And we're back. So, Thomas, you were going to talk to us about self-diagnosis, and then you were talking about how anything can be an addiction and the gendering of this. So I'll be interested to hear your perspective as a young adult about this, too, because I do think it's changing.
Yeah, so I think self-diagnosis is, it's not clinical. It's not an individual going to a diagnostic manual and saying, here are the criteria, I'm checking it off. It's how do I self-identify? Do I believe I have a problem, or do I believe what I do is fine?
Do other people believe I have a problem?
Or do other people believe? And so just focusing in on that self component, that the individuals who are engaging in porn or watching porn or creating porn, if they're doing that and they don't feel that there's a problem with it, and they don't see a negative impact in their life, it's not taking away from their work time, it's not taking away from their personal relationships with others in a way that's distressing to themselves, that's not really what we would consider an addiction.
Mm-hmm. So it may cross over into problematic if, let's say, it's violating a relationship agreement, or it's maybe you're not pursuing all the fun leisure things you would otherwise, or something like that. So it could be non-problematic. It could cross over into problematic, but those things are still different levels than a compulsion or an addiction.
Right. And so then when it crosses over and becomes self-diagnosed, I feel like there's a bit of a problem. Well, then I think you need to delve into why do you feel there's that problem? Is it because it's interfering with those relationships? Is it because it's now taking away time that you should be spending on personal care, of sleeping and eating? And at that point, I think we need to talk about, or not we need to talk about, but the individual can talk about, well, what would be an alternative?
Mm-hmm.
Is it that cutting back on the amount of porn is what's desired? And if they try that, they feel there's an inability to do so? Or is it they feel they need to change up what they're watching or engaging with? So that self-diagnosis, though, I think is, a healthy internal conversation to have for a person. And if you feel that you're at that level and you decide you want to approach a sex therapist or a counselor, then by all means you should do so.
Absolutely.
Whenever anything becomes subjectively that you personally believe it's causing you distress, you should seek out advice from other individuals that are qualified to assist you with that process. But I caution that just because you immediately find it distressing does not in fact make it an addiction. And nor should anyone say that it's immediately an addiction, because maybe it's just a matter of changing perspectives or realizing that, the amount you watch or the amount you feel it's impacting your life just needs to be monitored a little bit more.
Well, there's an element of pattern and need in this, right? So, I think we've all said, why did I eat that much pizza, right? But then the next day, do you then do it and go, God, and again, and then the next day, like, oh God, and again, why do I keep doing this, right? And so if it becomes part of a pattern and you're identifying each time, I'm displeased with what's happening, maybe I even know ahead of time that this is probably going to result in misery, but I've told myself it won't, and this is happening over and over again, then that's a different level than like, man, I really stayed up too late watching a lot of hot porn last night. Tonight I will go to bed earlier and do a better job. Like those are different scenarios. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think that as well as like doing a self-diagnostic of whether you are addicted to porn or not, you should also kind of think about, are you actually addicted to the pornography, or is it an outlet, or are you dealing with something else and that's kind of the way that you're dealing with it? Like if you compare a kid who loves playing soccer and who like wants to make it big and starts like their eating habits different, all they do is practice, all they do is focus on soccer, are you really going to call that an addiction, or is that striving for greatness? Is that doing something different and not only
I love striving for greatness and the conversation of masturbation and porn. I am physically training, I am striving for greatness.
Yeah, so it's good to kind of look at the underlining of everything as well. Like, are you actually addicted to watching pornography, or is it just kind of something that you do because of X, Y, and Z?
So let's take this to some questions that I hear all the time as a sex educator. People at my workshops ask me these questions. They email me with these questions. So I will often hear from couples who feel like there's some sort of element of cheating or some kind of disloyalty when somebody watches porn and masturbates. And sometimes it's the person who's watching the porn and masturbating who feels guilty about themselves. Mm-hmm. Maybe their partner hasn't even noticed or had a problem with it. Sometimes it's the partner who presumably isn't also doing it. At least they're not telling me. They're only telling me about the other person. And they feel like, I must not be good enough. I must not be hot enough, or why am I not good enough or hot enough? So this becomes a really common real life thing. So do you think this is common?
Yeah, I definitely feel that some people would kind of associate pornography or masturbation as cheating. However, a lot of pornography out there is kind of unrealistic visions. I feel like a lot of people look at it that sense and like maybe sexual fantasies and like things that they would want to do or something that they just like to watch and their partner probably isn't comfortable with it or won't engage with them in that particular fantasy that they have. So I feel like it's kind of just watching something or like thinking of doing something that won't happen. So it's technically not cheating. Like I wouldn't consider it as being unfaithful of any sort. But as human beings, we're always kind of self-concerned as to why we must be doing something wrong or incorrect. Like the person doesn't like them as much because we're always self-involved, and that's just like human behavior and human nature. Like we don't need to do this. So the person who's the person who thinks that their spouse or their partner is cheating on them, it just might be like a problem within them and not necessarily just the partner. But I feel like the partner who is engaging in watching pornography should disclose it and talk about it or whatnot with their partner.
So it's a good thing to have an open conversation about, but to recognize, what you're saying is that to recognize that, it's a fantasy element and that might be different from a cheating type of element.
Yes.
Or at least to have that conversation to see if we can all agree on what constitutes cheating in a relationship. I mean, if everybody feels like porn is cheating, who am I to tell them it's not? But to really kind of open that conversation and explore different options. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, and I think it also, goes back to our initial conversation of, what is porn? And I think the individuals involved in that situation need to have a conversation as to, okay, if I watch this, or I look at these pictures, or if I send this picture, does that constitute porn? Does that constitute something that, fits into this category and then crosses a line? Or is that behavior okay and this behavior isn't okay? Because I think we need to parcel out what it is about the behavior that's problematic. Because, I hear from individuals quite often actually saying, well, I'm allowed to watch porn, but my partner has a problem if I masturbate.
Oh,
so
goodness.
There's that distinction.
What a conundrum.
And I mean, I think for certain people that's fine. They say, okay, I'm, by watching this, that gives me the level of satisfaction that I'm looking for.
Or then I'm going to go engage with my partner afterwards or something.
Yeah. But for other individuals who want to pair those behaviors together or want to pair other behaviors together with watching porn, that's a different conversation. And I think if you don't have that conversation with your partner or partners, you're never going to know. And that's where, when that uncertainty comes in, that's where guilt can fester or fester, or shame can develop, or, reluctance to engage in future conversations. Because if you've been doing it for 10 years, watching porn, and then now you start a relationship.
Now you hide your porn for the next 10 years, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think there's, different levels for different relationships or for different parties. And it's about being clear what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, if you can identify that. And if you can, then communicating that.
And, I think there's all these sub-elements involved here, too. So it seems oftentimes when I speak to people, I just get this inkling that it's the shame, it's the hiding, it's the taboo. But it's also the type of porn. People don't always feel good about the type of porn they're watching. So the porn you can most easily find for free online may not be a type of porn that aligns with your values and ethics about things or with what feels good to everybody in the relationship that you view. Should I louder? And this is not to say that free porn is bad and nobody should be watching. I'm not trying to pass a judgment on that way, but for at least many of the people that I'm speaking to, which is a biased sample of folks, they're coming to a workshop or an educator or a therapist because they have a concern, right? That type of porn is concerning. And so, for instance, if they're watching, say, guy-girl porn, and it really looks like, the woman is in distress or not enjoying it or is faking her pleasure or things like that, it doesn't surprise me that female partners of men who are watching that may look at that and say, like, this is actually kind of distressing to watch for me. So, and that's a very kind of stereotypical example, but it happens a lot. So I will often invite people to actually start exploring more porn together, whether it's written or video or still picture or GIFs or whatever, and to look at different genres and maybe consider actually paying a little bit of money to support the industry that they're patronizing all the time. And the people who, can't pay their rent with your smiles at their porn, you have to actually pay for it. And find stuff that they feel better about patronizing. So, if you're concerned about people not using safer sex practices, there's a lot of porn where it is being used. If you want to see authentic female pleasure, or you don't want women at all in your porn, or you don't want men at all in your porn, or you want it to be all queer, that's out there. And there's great independent producers of this. And there's a lot of people who are making porn where the actors in it are exerting a lot of control over what happens in those scenes, and they're paid better, and their work safety considerations are taken care of. So if that were to make you feel better about the porn you're watching, or if you were watching porn with bodies that you feel are more similar to your own bodies, and that made it feel better, those are things to be considering too, instead of taking all of those issues with porn, just conflating them all with each other and then labeling it an addiction.
Yeah, and I really like that part you brought in towards, I liked everything you said, don't get me wrong.
Thank you.
But I think a bit around, what you're watching and how that impacts you, and having that conscious effort to really analyze your porn consumption. And by doing that, by critically thinking about it, I think can help, if you're having that subjective feeling of discomfort, to work through what that discomfort is. But it can also then help with dealing with those norms that we talked about. Addiction is partially determined by violating social norms. Well, if your norms are that you believe in, sex positive, fair pay, realistic bodies,
diversity, yeah,
all of those pieces, and then you consume that type of porn, well, then maybe you're able to recognize or come to terms with yourself that you're not violating some of your values or your norms. And then that aspect of addiction, as more of a colloquial phrase, can maybe be diminished.
It might be something you feel more comfortable sharing with others too, because it's more aligned with it. Now, for some folks, any kind of watching of porn is immoral. It's just not in their value system for that to be okay. And that's something to be considering too. If you're doing something that feels really wrong to you because of a moral or an ethical standpoint for yourself, that becomes a complex conversation about thinking about those moral and ethical standpoints. Or maybe, in your background, that isn't up for debate at all, and you just need to not be doing it. And so those, it becomes more and more complex, or people in a relationship with each other where they have very different opinions about that, and it's not going to be worked out. So that may be something to think about as a potential deal breaker. Before we move on to the next question, just a reminder to thank you for listening to us on CFRU, and you can stream us at cfru.ca, and we're at 93.3 FM here in Guelph. So sometimes I work with people who are seeing things in porn that they realize they want to try with partners, but the intensity level in the porn is high, and that kind of intensity is not what they're doing with their partners. And that worries them. They worry that they're becoming attracted to something. They're on some sort of slippery slope where they're going to want more and more and more. Or perhaps it's the partner who's concerned. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, and I think we've alluded to it a bit, that sometimes by watching porn, you are opened up to new things that you didn't realize existed before, or didn't see how it
There's so many puns in this conversation. I'm really having trouble. Please continue.
That's the whole purpose of you being here, is to occasionally slip that in. And
my gosh, shoot it again. Keep going.
See, now I just lost my train of thought.
All right. I'm going to make you stop. Kiara, what do you think about this?
Like Thomas said, a lot of people don't necessarily know what they're into, and like pornography is like a whole new world, and it just has a bunch of stuff you didn't even know about, because a lot of the stuff that is in pornography is like not talked about, and like it's kind of like weird. Normal people don't do it. Like that's what people tell us, right? So it might be concerning if it's like violent, but that's probably just what they're into, and like the partner has the right to do it or not, but the intensity isn't really a problem, because I feel like they're probably both on the same kind of playing field as well. They're not paid adult performers, actors. So it all depends on the people.
Yeah, and to remember it's acting, right? I mean, you just brought out the word acting. So just as with, if you see somebody do a wild stunt in a movie, that's an actor or that's someone who's been trained how to do it, or it's not actually really happening the way it looks. But for some reason around porn, we assume that we're getting some sort of like very nonfiction documentary quality sort of information.
Well, because I love it. They use this is an amateur film as if somebody just went at home and filmed it and then put it online. In some cases that does happen. But some of it, you're like, no, there's some CGI going on here. And
well, the amateur porn that we see is one of the largest parts of the porn industry now as far as money generation goes. So it's not like amateur sports. It's not the same in the way that happens. So people may be, well, you talked about violence in porn, and that becomes a big topic, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there's also violence in movies, but we don't say, oh gosh, that person really went out and shot 50 people to make this movie. That's terrible, right?
Yeah.
We recognize that there's acting going on there. It's possible that some people are catching some actual violence on film and putting it online. That could certainly be happening. There's concerns about, employment practices in porn, especially around amateur porn, that is still paid porn. So all of those things are real, but again, not necessarily a large portion of what's happening out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people kind of categorize it all as the same thing. Like pornography, like it's violent. They have like a lot of children in them, or like kids who are like below the age of 18. So I feel like they just kind of clump everything together and say this is pornography. It's violent. It promotes rape. It does this. So I feel like a lot of people they just take one little part and define the whole industry, and they define everything as pornography. Like pornography is violent, which is incorrect, because there's a lot more than just the one category, the one subject.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it is important that we do recognize when there are ethical issues that are happening in the porn industry, and we need to call that out, and we need to be conscientious consumers of our porn. I think
that's what pretty much any industry.
Yeah, I think if you're going to put money towards something, or hopefully you're putting some money towards it, if it's something you're engaging in and therefore rewarding people or paying for their time and skill.
And skill. Yeah.
And skill. But I think we do have to call out when those things are happening that don't conform to our values, or don't conform to workplace practices, or don't conform to criminal law. That, we need to not populate that, or not engage in that sort of consumerism. Our money is a very powerful tool in terms of changing behavior. And so in those cases where things have crossed that line, to take a step back. And if there's concern that, but that's what I really like to see, or that's what provides me arousal and pleasure, thinking about, okay, well then where can you consume that content from sources that are more ethically captured or ethically produced.
Right. And just that healthy monitoring yourself of recognizing the difference between fantasy and reality. Mm-hmm. For most people, they will know the difference between fantasy and reality and those things. And if they decide to engage in their relationship, it's a role play sort of thing. It's a dirty talk sort of thing. And they may be doing some things that are physically more intense, but it should be with a great deal of communication and planning, and maybe even there's classes out there to learn how to do some of these more intense things more safely. So being able to bring in that sort of preparation instead of just winging it in a way that risks one's partners, that assumes their consent when it's not happening, that assumes that just because I'm saying, I want to do this choking thing or something like that the other person will understand exactly what you're talking about with that. And also feel, free and able to give you feedback before, during, and after. And taking accountability for, if you mess up, then what's the appropriate accountability if you are going to be pursuing these things with people and some kind of mistake happens in communication or in the activity itself, that there's still accountability around that. For most people, they'll know the difference between these things, but there will be some people who don't, and it's true. And we've watched, or we've seen some studies out there that have shown that for Men who are okay with sexual assault, they hear humor around sexual assault as condoning it and giving them permission. Whereas guys who are not okay with that don't see that humor as permission giving. Right? So we know that for some portion of the population, seeing examples of things that are fictional, or at least it suggests that, for some portion of the population, seeing examples of things that are fictional feels permission giving and like they're one of the group that's doing a normal thing. That doesn't necessarily represent the majority of people who are engaged with a given activity.
And I think one way to assist with the process is if you like a certain type of porn, invite your partner to watch it with you. And allow that to be both an arousing situation, but also a conversation starter, or not a starter, but a conversation continuer in terms of, okay, this is what I'm thinking about. This is an example of what I'm thinking this looks like. How could we make this happen? Would you be interested in making this happen?
Or what portion of this would you want to make happen?
Yeah.
We talk about it and not do it. We can do this but not. I'm imagining like a porn potluck where you get all your partners together and everyone's like, bring your favorite type of porn and we'll all share with each other.
You just have some popcorn and you're just like, okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's debrief this kind of like they do in football.
Yeah.
Okay, this person's here. They cross over here.
Play by play.
Yeah.
You get somebody narrate it from the corner. I don't know. This is getting out of control. What do you think here?
So I just got, what were you just talking? I literally just...
Space out for a second. All right, Kiara, hypothetical for you here. If you were dating someone and you were watching porn from time to time and they told you that they didn't like it and they thought it was distressing and disturbing and they wanted you to just stop watching porn, what would you do?
Well, I'd get kind of angry to begin with because, like, they're just getting mad at me for something that, like, I haven't even, like, had the chance to kind of, like, not defend, but, like, talk about or explain. And, like, if it's definitely something that I'm into, it's insulting and it's kind of shameful because my partner, who's supposed to support me and supposed to be with me, is kind of going against something that I'm into or something that I like, which is, like, I would kind of expect them, especially them actually, to be comfortable and to be able to talk about this subject, to talk about this with them. So I would just be angry because, in general, like, they're just kind of attacking me for something that they don't know about, or without even asking me, or at all being relaxed about it. So I feel like my opinion or my sense of stuff or my perspective isn't at all resonating in this relationship. So I kind of feel offended and insulted because if it's something that's a part of me, then...
So what would be, or how would you feel would be a more appropriate way for a partner to approach this subject if they had concerns about the amount of porn that was being watched by their partner, by you? How would you, like, what would be a nicer way or a more open, inclusive way for them to talk about that?
Definitely them coming about the subject a lot smoother. So maybe potentially telling me that, oh, hey, like, I noticed that you watch a lot of porn, or you watch this particular porn. Why do you? Is this something that you are into? So kind of come at it as a, like, respectful, non-judgmental way. And you could have your own opinions, but I mean, if you're going to talk to me, kind of understand the situation and kind of have, like, a full assessment of what's happening. So don't jump to conclusions would be, like, the best way to kind of start it. And then listening to what I have to say. And you can still have your opinions and whatnot, but definitely, like, as a way to approach it, to do it very smoothly and, like, non-judgmental and open and comfortable with asking me if it's something that I feel strongly about.
So, Karen, Thomas, a follow-up question for both of you. Let's say you're dating somebody, not each other, but someone else, and you want to get busy with that person, but they would just rather be watching porn, and this seems to happen frequently. How would you handle that?
Well, I would get, in that case, I feel like I would get concerned and a little offended because I would just be like, well, what am I doing here? Like, you clearly don't want to get intimate with me, but yet again, you're always watching pornography. Like, what is happening? There must be something deeper. And especially if maybe in the beginning of the relationship, was there the same signs? They not engage in any, like, intimate see with me. So it really depends, because I feel like at that point it's becoming problematic because it's seriously affecting your sexual life. And
we're still going. All right.
so it's becoming an issue because it's becoming an issue in your relationship. So I would talk about it definitely and try to figure out why they're watching so much pornography, and just try to come at it not so aggressively, just in case if it's something that's very sensitive to them, that I'm not offending them in any way, shape, or form. So,
Good thoughts. How about you, Thomas?
Yeah, I think in terms of what I may or may not have experienced previously, something similar to this, would be trying to get them to invite me in. So if that's what they find comfortable to watch porn, and that's how they are finding the arousal begins, or that is their arousal process, to see if I can be part of that. Maybe not an active part, maybe just passive at first. Allow them to find their enjoyment, find their arousal, and over time almost scaffold myself in there, build up little opportunities of being part of that situation. Because it could be that, an individual's had a past of sexual violence or abuse or discomfort, and for them being physically intimate with another person isn't what works for them. And the porn is that outlet. And so it maybe takes time to be able to trust and bring someone in there at the beginning of a new relationship. Now, if that were to happen partway through the relationship too, I think it would be the same idea. How can I better understand what might be motivating someone into that? Maybe it's just, right now that's what they're looking for. There's no pressure of, having to please another person. They just need to focus on their own arousal, and the porn facilitates that sort of unidirectional arousal situation. But it's, there are lots of different reasons for it happening, and I think recognizing that there could be some highly intense reasons for it, to not jump into it too fast or too harshly just because you don't want to do more damage to that relationship.
As I'm listening to both of you, I'm thinking about the idea that we don't just have sex lives with other people, we have sex lives with ourselves too. And to try and balance your own private personal sex life with yourself, with your sex life with your partner. So, it's okay to enjoy things that turn you on as part of your solo sex life. It's okay to be in a relationship and also masturbate, and not always want that partner around for that activity necessarily, or however many partners you have. It's okay to want to do kind of sexual exploration in your own mind or with your own body solo. And so to be respectful of that, but at the same time, those, I don't want to say obligations, but I guess those shared expectations of intimacy, whatever those may be with your partner, and porn can be part of emotional intimacy as well. Those disclosures, those comfort levels, those things like that, as well as part of physical intimacy. So there's a balancing of that solo sex life with that partnered sex life, and trying to find respect, but also a common ground with your partner's expectations too. Certainly can be distressing if one person really believes in having their own solo sex life and the other person doesn't believe in masturbation at all. Even if they're okay with even if the non-masturbating partner is okay with the masturbating partner masturbating, but they don't want to, that mismatch can still be really challenging. So there's a lot to discuss around this that ends up not being so much about porn at all, but about these other things that are going on. And, how people feel about the type of porn that they're watching, or, what values we've been raised with about porn and about masturbation, about pleasure. Because really, I don't think we can talk about porn without also talking about masturbation or sex, right? Because it's all, no pun intended, it's all hand in hand, right? And so all of those concepts end up coming up, and it becomes much more complicated than you're watching this too much, or you're watching stuff that's gross. Yeah. And then it becomes a bigger, heavier conversation. But also a way for people to invite each other to know each other better and to increase that. Now, if you're running into all these issues and you've only been dating somebody a week or two, it may not be worthwhile, I kind of am a there's always more fish in the sea kind of person, but especially if this is something you're more committed to, then this can be an opportunity for growth and understanding together, or for finding a way to appreciate the different things you bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think at this point, kind of almost making a full loop back to that initial where this question came from, and this was recommended that individuals have been concerned about their own porn addiction, and kind of understanding you as a holistic person, that we aren't just made up of our sexual arousal and sexual identity, or our fantasy identity, as the case might be, but we're raised with certain values, we're raised with certain ideals, and making sure that we're okay with broadening our introspective scope when we have these concerns about, are we addicted to porn? Maybe we need to think about, okay, well, how were we raised about this? Were we talked about, like, people talked to us about porn when we were younger, as we were going through our sexual education, if we had sexual education, because maybe that's where some of this discomfort is coming from. It's just those conversations haven't happened yet because the system has failed us, or our families have failed us in this respect, or whatever. Whoever failed us, somebody failed us. And
it's not our fault.
Not all the time. And so in this conversation with yourself, or with a counselor, or a therapist, or a partner, or a friend, or a family member, just be open to the idea that you have to explore things that are not sexually related to it, but may have influenced why you're feeling some of these ways.
And Kiara brought up some really good points too about aspects of culture and gender and things like that. So there's also, different expectations of different people about what's okay and what people like. Of course, boys will be boys or whatever the case may be, but that makes you a nasty freak or something. And so thinking about those rules that we've absorbed and whether they are useful or not, and some will be useful. Don't watch porn until you lose your job. That's a useful social rule that we have, right? Or until you fail out of class. But other things about, of course guys will have this kind of sex drive and want to do these sorts of things, but women will not. And also the assumptions around heterosexuality with that and all sorts of different things. But I really liked a lot of those points you brought up. Is there anything on that you wanted to expand on or say more about before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I definitely feel like the sex culture is evolving in front of us. I feel like a lot of females are a lot more comfortable as talking about it, or even just you have like the hookup scene. And it was always super normal for like a man to like hook up with a bunch of like girls, but as soon as it comes to a girl, if she slept with 3 or 4 people, then that's it. You're done. So that becomes an issue, but it's a lot more accepting. A lot of women are recognizing that it's not realistic, and that male or female or whatnot, you are a sexual being and you will be sexual regardless, or you won't, but it's something different. But in terms of like women understanding that other women will be sexually active with many partners, with one partner, is up to them. So I feel like kind of women together understanding that will be the bigger change than men thinking differently of us, of females. So I feel like that's a really big thing. And even in pornography, like women are feeling maybe that they don't get to experience as much things, so that might be a different outlet as well, because it's not really talked about. Like females don't watch porn, females aren't sexually active unless they're like a whore, slut, or something like that. So they get labels put onto them. So I feel like gender in sex has definitely evolved, but it's not there yet, but it's slowly getting there. So.
Well, and when we see these mainstream things in the news about somebody having a sex addiction or porn addiction or something like that, where you see celebrity situations, it's often within heterosexual relationships, and it's women complaining about the men, whatever activities the men are doing, right? So women also get this gatekeeper role and things like that as well. So it becomes quite complex quite quickly.
And I worry a little bit about how the media has portrayed sex addiction or porn addiction too. I think sometimes that can be a really easy claim to make, to obfuscate or to ignore or to overlook other issues too. To say, oh, well, it's because they're watching porn that we have an issue here. Well, relationships are complicated entities, and there's a lot more than just watching porn or it takes more than just watching porn to ruin a relationship in a lot of cases. Not in all cases. In some cases, that's the deal breaker, and I'm not here to judge different relationships and the rules you put on your relationship. But just because celebrities are going to rehab for a sex addiction, or there's, another story about a politician who's, been caught with porn on their computer, I think we need to be careful not to suddenly assume, well, now this is an epidemic, or this is a problem that's related to porn. There's other things that play into those stories that we just don't hear in the media.
Definitely. I feel like it's kind of an easy solution or an easy answer, but it's a lot more complex than that. So I feel like people don't look at the big picture and they just kind of pinpoint the one thing and kind of say it's because of porn.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. And so, Thomas, thank you for all of your thoughts on this and for all your background research. Kiara, it was great to hear the perspectives that you were bringing in and your background information. I'm Ruthie. You've been listening to Sexually Charged Radio on CFRU.ca, 93.3 FM out of Guelph.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Got a question for Sexually Charged Radio? Send it to asksc@uoguelph.ca. But please do note that not all questions are guaranteed a response or acknowledgement on the show. We'll let you know if your question's been selected for discussion. Your name will be omitted from the show, but your question will be read out loud if selected. This account is monitored by a peer wellness educator from the Wellness Education Center at the University of Guelph, not by the host of this program.
You're listening to Sexually Charged Radio at the University of Guelph on CFRU 93.3 FM and online at cfru.ca.